Hey, I'm Christina Stembel. I'm the founder and CEO of Farmgirl Flowers. I can't remember the first time that I saw Levi's or heard about it. I imagine I probably saw the kids in school that were the cool kids wearing them, and so I obviously then wanted them as well. My budget was a little different than the cool kids' budget for school clothes, so I needed to save a lot of money first before I could buy my own Levi's. I was that kid that everybody made fun of. Part of that was because I really enjoyed just experimenting with my clothing, my outfits. Back then, it was not cool to stick out like a sore thumb, and I definitely did that. When I finally saved enough money to buy the two pairs of Levi's that I really wanted, the black pair and the blue pair, they were definitely the most prized possessions in my closet. How I would style them was completely different than anybody else at school. They would wear them with classic Levi's, pegged for a while even, and that was the style, and then with a pair of Reeboks and like a Notre Dame sweatshirt because we lived very close to Notre Dame. And I would wear them with a bodysuit, a studded belt, some combat boots that I DIY'd with these faux pearls I bought at the hobby shop in the craft store, and I super glued them all the way up the combat boots, and I thought I was cool, even though I knew I wasn't cool. And I thought that my outfit was just really, really hot. So I identified clothing as a representation of who I was very early. I'm not sure the age, but definitely in elementary school. It was probably like 5th or 6th grade when I started really, we would go to St. Vincent de Paul and the thrift stores to buy our school clothing. And we were given a $50 budget before school started. And $50 was more back then, but definitely not a ton. And, we would buy all of these secondhand clothes, and I would go home and I would rip them up and re-sew them together in different ways. And now looking back on it, I'm sure they looked very unique what I wore. I was an interesting kid, but I definitely felt out of place in general where I grew up. Growing up in a small town of under 4,000 people, where it's farm country, I always had a creative spirit, I guess. And I know my parents often thought, like, where did this kid come from? Like, why were we given this kid? What do we do with her? When I would, get my mom's singer out and try to like make something cool out of some shift dress from the 60s that I found vintage at the resale shop. So I knew I didn't fit in there. I knew I never wanted to wear the jeans and a sweatshirt and tennis shoes. I wanted to be my own individual, and clothing was a way for me to do that. So I wanted a pair of Levi's, and by a pair I mean 2 pairs of Levi's, because you can't just have one, right? I wanted a blue pair and a black pair. I wanted them very badly, and I went to Amish Acres, which I don't think is in existence anymore, but it was the fanciest store near my house. It was up in South Bend near Notre Dame. It was about 25 miles away from the farm that I lived on, always at the clearance racks when I had money saved up. And I would, buy some things from Amish Acres to complement the things from St. Vincent de Paul's resale shop and make outfits. I saw them in the men's section there. I don't think they had them in the women's section, or just the way my body was, the men's fit much better, low-waisted. Back in the 90s, didn't exist yet in women's jeans. And so I went and tried them on and, calculated how long it would be before I could afford them. Like I said, I worked a lot of jobs. And so at that point, I was babysitting a lot. I corn detasseled in the summer. But then I think this was during the school year, so I was working as a tour guide at Amish Acres on the weekends, where I would take large amounts of people through this Amish kind of homestead and show them how the Amish lived, because I grew up in Amish country, and that was a job that I could get before I was 16. You could get that because it was seasonal work. It wasn't open year-round. And so I could get that at 14, and I made $4.25 an hour. It was under minimum wage even, because it also was seasonal work, so had different laws. I loved it because back then I thought I wanted to be an actress too. So this was like my mini foray into acting, where I got to pretend that I was Amish living on this farm and showing people another way of life. But a good job that you could get at 14 and without a work permit in the state. And so, like I said, I just always wanted to work. And that's how I saved up enough money to get those 2 pairs of Levi jeans. I went there proudly with my $60. They were $30 a pair, and bought those 2 pair of jeans that I probably wore, I don't know, 10,000 times over the course of the next 10 years. So many times. So many times. When I moved from the farm in Indiana to New York City 2 weeks after I graduated high school, it was the most freeing thing in the world to me. Eye-opening. It was like there were choirs singing hallelujah behind me when I moved to New York City, because for the first time in my entire life, I fit in. I looked different than everybody else, and nobody cared at all. I would walk down the street and I would see style way better than mine. And I was like, whoa, I love that and that and that. And everybody had their own thing going, and nobody cared. Nobody cared that, you know, you dyed the tips of your hair hot pink, or that you super glued really fake pearls to combat boots, or anything like that. They just were their own thing. And so I think in New York, it was just freeing that I was like, oh my gosh, first of all, I've like been sleeping on a whole lot of cool ideas for clothes. So let me go. And so many resale shops that were way cooler than St. Vincent de Paul. So I just, you know, I got to continue experimenting, and in a way where there wasn't this fear of being made fun of either, because everybody experiments in New York and is just way cooler than I was. So it was amazing. I lived in New York for a couple of years and moved to Chicago. And Chicago was a lot more reserved than New York, but still it was kind of how I explained it was the place where all the cool kids moved from like 8 states around the Midwest, all moved to Chicago. So you had really cool, interesting people there as well that also kind of, you know, kind of tested the boundaries of looks and appearance and identities and things like that. But that's when I started working in hotels and hospitality, and I was really young, and so I needed to look older. So I started like dressing kind of like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead was definitely an influence there, where I was like, okay, I need to wear a suit every day, and I need my hair in a French twist, and I need to look like I'm 30 when I'm 20, you know? And so that's what I did. And I like looked way old. It's so funny because now, you know, I want to look younger, of course, but back then I was like, I need to look old and reserved. So my style definitely changed to a more professional, and by professional, I mean cheap polyester suits, because that's what I could afford, but I still gave them a little twist, you know, and then very subdued hair and makeup, and just wanted to look way beyond my years so I could move up a lot. And so that's what I did in order to move up at companies. I needed to kind of fake it till I make it. And I, you know, wasn't even old enough to serve wine in the hotel that I was then the manager of, you know, and things like that. And clothes allowed me to do that, and style allowed me to do that. So then at 22, I came out to San Francisco, and what was so interesting in San Francisco was how style was not a thing here. It was like the opposite of a thing. And everybody was wearing literally what looked like they just picked up off the floor in the corner of their bedroom, and might be dirty still. But it was definitely, it felt very like post-grunge here, where it was all about like plaid shirts, wrinkled, unbuttoned, you know, hanging loose with, you know, t-shirts with like, you know, race names from 10 years ago, and jeans and flip-flops. And then very quickly then went into, with the .com #1 was during that time, everybody in like a Patagonia vest. Really love that Patagonia really fought back against that recently, because it was definitely like the tech vest thing was a real thing. So it was tech vests and shirts, like, you know, and jeans, and that was it, and flip-flops type of thing. That's the style here. Wasn't a style that I loved and embraced. So I kind of went back to my roots of, you know, being creative in my dress. And when I was working at Stanford, I remember my colleagues would constantly comment about like, oh my gosh, how many clothes do you have? And it wasn't that I had tons of clothes. It was that I just styled them very differently every day. And so that kind of became more of my identity again, because I went back from the like very subdued suits because now I was older, getting older, and so I didn't need to fake it till I made it as much. After Stanford, that takes me to Farmgirl, and definitely had a very big transition in my personal style in starting my own company. At Farmgirl, I really got to decide who I wanted to be and how I wanted to dress kind of helped define that. And, early years, honestly, Farmgirl, I just was, whatever I could throw on at 3:00 in the morning to get to the flower market in time to get the flowers and then get back and do all the things. And then, I'd go to bed at like midnight and get up at 3. So I was very sleep deprived, and usually it was some stretch pants and a sweatshirt and whatever I'd slept in probably when I was starting out. And then, when I started hiring employees, I needed to actually get dressed. California had seeped into me at that point, and so things are definitely more informal in California, and I don't need to wear suits when I'm starting a business and working on the floor in a big drafty warehouse. And, for the first 5.5 years, I still had a daily quota of making bouquets on the floor, and so it needed to be something comfortable, but I also needed to be the boss, and so I needed to be perceived as the boss. And so I kind of created a new uniform of sorts. I love that Levi's is, kind of the brand of progress. And so I felt that way. So I wore, my staple was a pair of Levi's, a sweater, and some comfortable Danskos or shoes that I could be on my feet for 12, 14 hours a day minimum. And that was pretty much my uniform because it was professional enough that I could still be seen as the boss, comfortable enough that I could still do a quota of 100 bouquets that day, and still look like I'm in charge. So now we're heading into our 10-year anniversary. And so the last few years, I haven't had a daily quota on the floor, and I've been transitioning from, kind of a hybridized CEO / team member doing everything role into one that looks more like a CEO, where I sit at desks like this and do a lot of computer work and do a lot of meetings, and right now Zoom calls like everyone else and things like that. And then I still do a lot of traveling. I do traveling to distribution centers that we have, fulfillment centers, farms, things like that. My uniform has shifted, but it still looks very much the same in that I am definitely a jeans girl, and a good pair of Levi's is still a staple for me, and I just dress it up differently. So instead of a sweater and Danskos, now I put on a blazer and cute shirt and jewelry, and my shoes don't have to be as practical, which is great unless I'm going to farms. And so it's definitely a uniform that just makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel in charge. It makes me feel powerful, and also one where I still work a lot of hours, and I can work a lot of hours in that uniform without not being comfortable for a long period of time, which is really important to me. The Levi's Farmgirl partnership is probably one of the most proudest moments of my life, and definitely of my 10 years at Farmgirl. This was a dream I had probably in 2016, I would say. I was like, I want to partner with amazing brands to wrap our burlaps in fabric that they specialize in. And Levi's was the very first company I thought of because of those 2 501 pairs of jeans that I loved to death. It's a San Francisco company that I really admire, how they've built it, how they take care of their teams, just the great company that it is. And so I had this brainchild of like, let's partner with Levi's, and our burlap-wrapped bouquets then become denim-wrapped bouquets instead, and this would be the best thing ever. And so it remained in my head. We were a tiny company at that time and didn't have a lot of name recognition, and fast forward a few more years, we have some growth, we have more team members who can help manage the process for me. When I saw the email this weekend, I literally cried. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional now. It was like such a big idea in my head that I wanted to happen so badly, and it did. And I think it's just proof that like when you really work hard at something, things happen and you can make things happen. My team at Farmgirl made it happen, and the team at Levi's made it happen, and we're so grateful. The fact that Levi's wanted to work with us was just the biggest honor in the entire world for me, this small town girl from Indiana. They, coveted their jeans and wore them daily. And it's a proud day. It's a really proud day.